Name is Erica Mixon. I am the content manager here at Blumira. Today, we are talking about malware trends to expect in 2022. As the year comes to a close, it's always good to, look forward and talk about what's ahead, what we should be prepared for in the future so that you can protect your organization as much as possible. Joining us today, we've got Aviv Grafi, who is the CTO and co-founder of Votiro. Thank you so much for joining us, Aviv.
Thanks, Erica.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background? How did you get started in cybersecurity, Aviv?
Yeah, of course. So actually, I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. It's late Friday here, and I started Votiro a while ago. But before that, I was serving in the 8200 unit here in the Israeli intelligence force. I was focusing mostly on offense and defense operations, and I was doing pen testing for quite some time, learning how to hack with a license into organizations. Then I came up with the idea that eventually turned into Votiro and how to protect enterprises from the threats that might be embedded in documents.
Wow, it sounds like a really interesting background, Aviv. We're happy to have you join us and share your insight and your experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've also got Matt Warner joining us. Matt is a veteran here of Blumira webinars and always is happy to share his expertise as well. Thank you so much for joining us again, Matt.
Hello, happy to be here. Happy to be here with the excited to talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background for those of
Sure. Yeah, probably should.
who might not know.
Yeah, I'm Matt Warner. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Blumira. Really where Blumira came from and my background is in software engineering and offensive and defensive security as well. And what I've learned over the last 10, 15 years is that small, medium businesses really don't have a chance when it comes to attackers. They don't really have a good way to defend against them in a way that gives you visibility into your environment. And that's a lot of where Blumira came from, which was how can we start to change the community in the world as it pertains to the attackers where they are and the defenders where we are, and start to balance it a little closer to sanity for all of us. Not for the attackers. We hope that they aren't sane. Hopefully they feel terrible, but that's their problem.
Yes, sanity for everyone is important, except for the attackers, of course. Well, we're happy to have you, Matt, and thank you so much again for joining us. So we'll dive right in, but before we do, I just want to let everyone know that we will have a Q&A period at the end. So feel free to just type in the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we'll just bring up questions a little bit towards the end. Also, if you have any predictions, think about those throughout the presentation. The person with the most ridiculous prediction will actually win a $25 Amazon gift card courtesy of Votiro. So definitely some incentive to participate there. Just try to have that in mind throughout the presentation, and we're excited to have you all share what your predictions are. All right, so let's get into it in terms of the predictions that Aviv and Matt have to share today. So, unless you're living under a rock these days, the Log4j vulnerability is something that has really made headlines recently, and is a part of one of the predictions that Matt and Aviv have to share. So Matt, can you tell me a little bit about how the Log4j vulnerability, how you see that kind of playing out in the long term in terms of, malware in 2022?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Log4j, Log4j, and Log4Shell. Realistically, the class of vulnerability that's part of will become another one of those looking for outdated applications that attackers are just going to put as a part of their effort. And with the case of Log4j, you don't really need to look. You can just spray and hope that something comes back. So we and I expect it to kind of continuously grow, continue to be impacted, and see attackers leverage new ways to kind of exploit Log4j. And we're seeing that with the 2.15 patch, where there's that simple bypass for the local host that essentially makes that patch irrelevant, and it forces people over to 2.16, which you should be at anyways if you are updating your Log4j. But it's also one of those things that I expect to see most smaller organizations, once their vendors get their devices updated or the stuff gets pushed out and updated, they probably won't see a ton of issues outside of those really old internal applications that were just like, oh, we forgot that we were running Tomcat from 5 years ago, and it was just sitting there. And then the moment someone's able to drop in, they're able to exploit further from there. So I expect it to be that kind of thing as we move forward through it. Whereas if you're a large org with like 700 Java developers and you need those Java developers to make sure they are not on that version of those versions of Log4j, things start to get a lot more wild for those organizations, and that attack surface gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
So actually, Matt, I think that one of the things that's very unique in Log4j, Log4 shell, is that it's so fundamental in any enterprise, in any almost any even security products. They use Log4j. I mean, the number of emails we've got from partners that we're working with saying we had to patch our systems. It's crazy, and I think that's why it's not just one of the easiest RCEs, remote code executions, that we saw in the last few years. It's also so widespread that it's really, really scary. And I think that those holy grail vulnerabilities, holy grail exploitations techniques, that we all thought, right, that we're gonna see less and less of those, and we always get surprised that we see more. I think I will continue to be surprised. I think one of the predictions is that we'll see more such fundamental vulnerabilities. And I think what's also unique with the Log4 for shell is that the exploitation techniques or vectors are so broad. Even earlier today, we saw someone that actually uploaded a project to GitHub that you can use actually to exploit a PDF library on enterprise applications, an Apache PDF document library, that just by sending a PDF document where the size of the document embedded in that PDF is just being that string that used to exploit that Log4 shell. So just sending a PDF to an enterprise application, upload that to a website, maybe sending that by email, that's all needed for triggering that. This is scary. This is one. And I'm not talking about exactly what you mentioned with the spraying method, just changing your user agent and just waiting for queries to pop up and to see who is vulnerable. So this is extremely crazy vulnerability, and I think it got the right to be talked on our first 5 minutes of our discussion today. I mean, the last I think a few days, no one talks about anything but that.
Yeah, very, very, you're spot on. It's one of those things that I think you're going to see ransomware operators leverage it to just see what they can get, but you're going to see proper operators leverage it in really interesting ways to get deeper into environments. And it really is something that's hard to suss out in an environment, which makes it even more kind of pervasive. Because who knows if your vendor properly updated it.
And also, if I may say, when I was researching that, I was amazed by how easy to exploit Log4 shell. I found that in Black Hat in 2016, there was an entire talk talking about that specific attack vector. Yeah. So it might be lying there for maybe 4 or 5 years now, maybe more. And maybe it was exploited and we even didn't know that. So I think you're going to see more of that.
Yep, agreed.
Definitely some scary stuff, and with unfortunate timing as well. With the holidays coming up, it seems like IT administrators and security folks are going to have to be monitoring their environments throughout the holidays, which is never an easy thing to do. And Log4j isn't the only major vulnerability that has come out recently that ransomware and malware threat actors will take advantage of. We've also got Print Nightmare, we've got the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability. So unfortunately, it seems like threat actors kind of have a lot of choices when it comes to what they can use as initial attack vectors.
Yeah, the Exchange for this year for server-side request forgery with like proxy login and all the good ones, proxy shell, proxy token. I think you're going to see a lot of people move to Office 365 just for the sake of not having to host their own Exchange, but I mean, we know from our intelligence and from our investigations that a lot of ransomware this year landed because of Exchange servers. And you can correlate that just as much to what happens if I have a vulnerable log4j server that I let sit there. What happens if I let these things sit there? This is what ends up happening when those vulnerabilities come out. And there's no time to patch, or there's not the effort to patch in this situation. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So the attack surface is still the same old one. I mean, those old Exchange servers are still lying there. I mean, 2010, even 2013, still operating somewhere in some organizations, because it's, we all know it's not an easy move. So we talk about enterprise application, we talk about Exchange servers. So the attack surface is still there. And I think the bad guys, they have a lot of time to to scrape that and see what can be found. Yep.
They always have more time. They always have more time than defenders, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So another prediction that we wanted to discuss today, it sounds a little crazy. You know, these new malware loaders, they have some pretty ridiculous names. We've got Squirrel Waffle, then we've got Crackbot. But these aren't the names of, a new band or something even more ridiculous. They're actually the names of malware loaders. So Matt and Aviv, can you talk a little bit about, the cyber kill chain and how malware loaders play into that? Where does that fall into place there?
Yeah, so I can start and say, look, for those of you who not remember exactly what cyber kill chain, so that's the term that was coined a while ago, and the idea is that every successful attack consists of few phases, and one of the first phases is that getting that payload to be delivered to the target. So getting, once I get the intelligence on my target and getting a payload, for example, let's say that malware, and this need to be sent either by attacking their Exchange server, like Matt mentioned, or by sending a weaponized Word document, maybe a macro-enabled Excel spreadsheet, and this need to be sent somewhere. In order to execute and actually to do the exploitation where the malware loader is being executed. And I think that those three probably first stages, those are the crucial stages. If we hit the exploitation, the delivery, the payload, any stage in the first three, we have a better chance to defeat that attack, and that's why it's really important. On the other hand, we see that those bad guys are leveraging new techniques. If we talk about macros, we've all been suffering from the macro 4 thing, and we see some more techniques like even the log4j. I mean, sending something out there and then dropping our bad thing. That's the process of those bad guys.
Yeah, the first three stages are really where we push people for visibility and to get that, like, you want to be able to stop it at the start of exploitation. You don't want them to get into persistence. You don't want them to get into exfiltration. It's so hard to route someone when they have persistence across your environment and you're seeing like 50 reg run keys change. And you're like, well, what am I going to do now? At that point, you just call an IR firm and you hope that you can route the whole thing. But moving that up and thinking about where that kill chain is and making sure that you can kind of break those pieces down become really important to you. And I had a similar conversation this morning where it's all, we like every year we always go back to the fundamentals of security, where we're like, well, maybe we should go back and talk about the fundamentals, because realistically it's always the same every year in that regard. What really changes is the ability of the attackers, the techniques that they're using, the quality of the techniques especially, and how they kind of leverage them together. Because if you don't have a good mail spam campaign, and you don't have a good campaign that gets people to open that document, and you don't really have something that's enticing enough to get them to enable macros, you really haven't even started into being successful at attacking. But you can get them to enable macros, or if they have an updated exchange, you have this really interesting hook in as an attacker where you can get a lot deeper into an environment. And how many people are actually monitoring like process pivoting inside of Windows, how many people are taking like full sysmon logs, how many people are even taking process spawning logs from their audit Windows environments. It's all a lot of data that you have to pull together in Munge, and it really is kind of one of those things that's required, especially looking into 2022, as to how can we predict what's going forward. Well, at the very least, we can predict, like Aviv was saying, that people have to do those steps. They must be done for them to get into your environment. And if they aren't done, you likely aren't owned, or you have an insider threat. That's a whole other problem. And they skipped the first stage or two, perhaps. But either way, it's those fundamentals of visibility, securing my environment, securing, like the poll that just came up, securing my users because they aren't going to secure themselves. They just can't. It's not something they can do. And using security applications like Votiro to ensure that when you're pulling files into your environment, or generally when you're doing things in your environment, that you can get that visibility and protection you need, because it's going to keep happening. Emotet started how many years ago? And we're still talking about Emotet using the exact same techniques, essentially, and except for they dropped Cobalt Strike now. And we're like, well, I guess it still happens. And the same thing's going to happen in 2022, I suppose. That's my best prediction.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. I think that talking about the same techniques with Emotet and the others, that's exactly the problem. So we're not really solving that. And I think that with the new malware loaders that at least in Votiro we've seen on the last couple of years, we see the same malware loader getting better. I mean, they're finding new way to obfuscate themselves, but that's the same service. So maybe now the macro will be generated differently. Maybe they will pull that payload from the from remote network using a different injection. But and we're going to see more techniques, exactly as you mentioned. But it's going to be the same families of those malware loaders. Yep.
Absolutely. And both of you were talking about phishing as well, and the ability for ransomware threat actors to launch a ransomware attack with that attack vector. So it seems like phishing is not going to stop anytime soon. It's not going to slow down. Aviv, you had talked earlier about the NSO hack. Can you talk a little bit about that and how phishing played a role there?
Yeah. So before jumping into NSO, just to explain how easy it, even if you're not a nation-sponsored attack or campaign. I mean, if we all know those anti-phishing campaigns that the organization run with their employees, right? I mean, telling them you need to spot the phishing, you need to win the spot the phishing game. And we all know that a day after the entire organization went through that campaign, send everyone an email saying, hey, there was a problem wiring your paycheck. Please fill in the attached form. And we all know, including myself, I will fill the attached form because I want to get my paycheck, right? So eventually, there are a lot of exploitation techniques out there, including the fabulous Log4Shell. But the human element is still the easy one to crack. And that's why we see the phishing techniques of sending just simple emails, because it's so cheap to do that. And having that sent intelligently, this is, I think, probably the best technique that hacker could do. And we saw in Votiro recently that one of our customers, we found that there was an attack that we were able to stop as it came from one of his partners. So there was a law firm that they were working with. So it didn't came from someone they didn't know. It came from someone they knew. Okay. Yes, they were expecting that email. Yes, they were expecting a contract draft. Yes, they opened that. Okay. So I think phishing and that delivery method will be still rising next year. And that's where we see those statistics of 98% of Microsoft enabled macro enabled documents. This is crazy. But putting that aside, one of the things that probably some of you saw yesterday, Matt, did you see that post of Google Zero yesterday?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Very good. I think it's one of the most sophisticated technical analysis of exploitation technique that I've read on the last few years. And for those who haven't read that yet, go read that. Maybe we can post that here. And one of the things that Google Zero, Project Zero did there is they analyzed what NSO, actually the weapon that they were using. They were using an iMessage technique just to send a message to someone's phone, and they were sending someone that looks like a GIF, like an animated GIF that need to be rendered on the phone, but actually that was a PDF where they were able to use a compression vulnerability to build a full-blown architecture of a computer. And this was fascinating to see that kind of technique. And it was, again, carried by leveraging a remote attack by just sending a crafted document, in this case, a PDF. So we see that usage of complex data structures in phishing, and we see that even nation-sponsored attacks or companies using that, which is probably demonstrate that my prediction, at least, that hackers will be inspired from those kind of attacks, and we'll see more of that.
Yeah, the NSO group's method of attack there is incredibly sophisticated, and the work they put out there from what they did is not necessarily great in regard to targeting. However, from a technical point of view, it was incredibly complex. It was an amazing application of exploitation there. And I only imagine, I mean, over the years, obviously, we hear bits and pieces fall out from organizations like NSO Group, and I expect we'll hear similar in 2022 on and off, probably like Hacking Team kind of thing when that fell out years ago, where these really sophisticated exploits come up. And I think if you think about private organizations, the people they have working for them, the kind of work that they can put into exploit development if their time and money is available, this is the kind of work that comes out of that. And it's really, really impressive when it comes down to it. And it allows the kind of attacks that you saw being leveraged by NSO Group just generally across the environment.
So I think if I would be, if we think what the bad guys are doing now, are just maybe mimicking the same techniques, trying to find those compression techniques or maybe some other formats in some other vectors that NSO just didn't need to do that because they had their own. Same goes with the Log4j and Log4Shell. So probably you'll see more mimicking those fascinating implementations of exploitations.
Yes, and I think the NSO Group, I'm pretty sure that compression technique they used, I'll have to go back and read it again, was an old compression technique. It was just a legacy technique that was brought forward, and that's a classic computer science problem. Just dragging the stuff along and hoping for the best, and then it runs into us in the future, which is the inevitability of it all.
Exactly that. That's exactly, I think, the number one source of vulnerabilities. Those are the legacy code that no one actually took care of. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, no one thought about that. We didn't have the tools that we have today, to do that safe coding techniques and processes. So that makes a lot of sense. If you remember, I think it was a year ago that there was I think 19 years old vulnerability, local privilege escalation. Remember that?
Yeah.
That was found. That's exactly the same thing. Something was lying there for 20 years, waited this to be found.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said when we started this conversation, every year I think that, okay, maybe that will be I wouldn't say the last one. We'll see less, but no, we'll see more. We see more and more. Probably that there are a lot of code out there.
The more people looking,
bugs in it.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
The increase in people not necessarily looking for bug bounties, but researchers, people that are interested. It's just so much more, and like we're gonna keep talking about Log4j on and off, anyways. And the Log4j JNDI issue, that lookup that was added in 2013. It was added 8 years ago. It was just sitting there for a long time, and it was added, if you go look at the pull request, because it's public, for convenience. A developer said, you know what, I'd really like to do this, and they went, yeah, great, let's do that. And no one thought about it until someone 8 years later said, this is a huge problem. We need to do something about this right now. And it happened in a tweet with a POC, which is how it's going to keep happening, I would imagine, sadly. But
So the circle of life, but in the worst way possible.
yeah. The exploit circle of life, that's for sure.
Exactly. And speaking of that, there's definitely going to be some evolution in terms of how ransomware groups will interact, the way that they operate. In 2021, we saw more of the rise of ransomware as a service. The professionalization of ransomware, the fact that some ransomware groups have full-on call centers where they have customer service, and they're really making it into a business. Aviv, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we'll continue to see that in the next year?
So I'm pretty sure we're going to see more of that. I think that one of the reasons that we all probably familiar with is that the cryptocurrencies, though actually that's what helped those groups in actually to grow. And I think as the cryptocurrency market is growing, usually growing, right? So we're going to see that this is more beneficial for them. And we see that this business, as you mentioned, that's ransom as a service, would just be better as the technology market getting better. We all actually heard that those companies are so rich because it's actually working. They're investing in more companies that they can offer that as a service. So those bad guys that are sitting in offices, they're having happy hours, they're having Christmas parties, and just
bars of gold.
yeah. They're paying probably the salaries in Bitcoin, but yeah. I think that we're gonna see more of those because just this game is being fueled by the cryptocurrencies, as that was the catalyst. That this is the fuel.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone on this planet has different opinions on cryptocurrencies at this point for different reasons, be it climate change, power consumption, ransomware exploits, and there are other benefits associated with it. I'm not only going to say negative things about cryptocurrencies, as to not bias myself necessarily. But yeah, I mean, it's insane. I mean, the Cuba ransomware group that the FBI sent a flash out about a few weeks ago, they only noted 4 wallets for their Bitcoin wallets, and those wallets had $52 million in them. So, I mean, this is not like small amounts of money that are getting passed back and forth. And it's so easy to own people at this point from a ransomware perspective. I mean, going back to the exchange stuff, Log4j, I mean, most of them still start with phishing, generally speaking, at this point. And you go back to those fundamentals of security. You expect your end users to secure themselves, and that will be a bad day for you every day of the week. And when you expect that, and they end up opening up a document with macros or a similar kind of exploit, like the JavaScript one that came out, or not JavaScript, it was one of the request ones that came out this year, which I can't remember the name of. Those just become bigger and bigger as your environment. You add that on top of all the LPs that came out this year, or Hive Nightmare, or Print Nightmare, or anything that's come out over this past year. It just kind of stacks up to the situation where you really have to kind of push it all the way back and think about, as these groups evolve, how can I make sure that first and second stage don't get triggered? Because like we see this pretty often where a ransomware group will drop current version Cobalt Strike. And current version Cobalt Strike is real hard to detect for AV. It does not do a good job of detecting, because the way that Cobalt Strike works, it's going to, especially we'll use the macro example, it's going to come in, it's going to load that first stage, it's going to load another stage, it's going to do this all in memory. And that final stage is going to open up enough memory specifically for that payload, insert it, and then just stop. And your AV in most cases is just going to sit there going, I don't know what's happening. I'm just going to wait for something else to happen, and we'll go from there. And you really have to have that deep visibility, either into not allowing macros to run, having something that stops those documents from being weaponized, or you have to have really deep visibility into every host. So you're saying, like, I know that WinWord just pivoted into PowerShell, and I know that PowerShell just opened up memory. What is happening right now? And in most cases, most people who would pull apart the base64 of the PowerShell wouldn't think like, this looks bad, this looks terrible. It looks like normal code that's just running and loading stuff in, because these ransomware operators know, like, if you can obscure it in a way that looks normal, perfect, do that. But I mean, as we all know, looking at macros that are bad, and if you get a chance to look at them, they look like complete trash, generally speaking, because they're incredibly hard to read. But there's a stepping stone of like, make this part hard to read, make this part look really ideal, so the sysadmin who looks at it won't care about it, and then inject into memory, and then just wait, and then build persistence up. And you get this. That was something that didn't happen by ransomware operators 5 years ago. They didn't do it. They never would have done it. But now it's just nuts, is it comes down to it.
Yeah, I think you just described how to really fool the IT administrator need to actually read that macro. So we're giving the employees that task of spot the phishing, and giving the IT administrator the task of spot the malicious macro. Both of them will fail.
Yep, very much so.
Someone had asked a question about that. We can get to that later on in the Q&A, but you know, it seems like both of your suggestions are to, rather than rely on phishing tests and end user prevention, which certainly important detection, that is going to really help you in those situations.
Yeah, detection mitigation are your lifesavers. You don't want your end users to decide if a macro is safe. Never, 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 never. You
And
will just get it.
We had that poll asking if macros were enabled on Microsoft 365, and some folks responded that they didn't know. Is there a quick way to determine whether macros are enabled or disabled within your organization?
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a pretty simple PowerShell registry value that you can probably check. And to be honest, if you don't know, probably it is enabled, because Microsoft unfortunately didn't help us in order to get this easily disabled. So if you don't know that, probably it is enabled, because that's the default.
It's a good tip.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, if you haven't touched it, it's enabled, guaranteed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to know. So we've also moving on to our last prediction, actually. You know, with 2022, there's going to be, you know, the election cycle happening, and that will certainly affect the malware landscape. Matt, do you kind of want to talk to how that will affect things from your perspective?
Sure, yeah, and we're speaking about, this is a very like US centric topic, I do realize, because
That's a good point.
2022 is the US. I think Israel was last year, and then you have again in 2025. So I don't, maybe a little calmer.
Ideally, we had 4 in 2 years, but yeah, ideally.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Good point. Yes. So in the US, I expect that we'll continue to see. I mean, the US over the last, I don't know, what year is it? 5 years, we've seen such a growth in propaganda and attacks across different kind of avenues around here. COVID, of course, increased part of that, and it really what the benefit is to attackers is that it makes phishing easier, because it builds that narrative, and it puts that narrative into people's heads. And that narrative isn't something that the phisher or the attacker needs to build. They know that someone's going to be thinking about the election in November, so they can send something out in late October and say, hey, vote for blah, or you should look at this to think about voting for blah, and get someone to click or download or open macros with that. It is just kind of the inevitability of politics in any country as it grows, as you get near election cycles, as you get into, and depending on the country, this differs, because some don't allow you to talk about it forever. You have to talk about it near the election, whereas in the US, you just talk about it forever and you just never stop. So it continues to kind of be a flywheel for attackers to build up that logic and say, here's what we're going, here's what we're doing, here's how we can attack people with phishing. If you think about, at least the way that I look at it, if we think about more broad things, you think about small municipalities. I know someone had mentioned that, small municipalities, cities, local governments, schools, those kind of things tend to get kind of just bystander effect during votes, especially. We see it on and off. It tends to be things like people trying to casually break into environments, directory enumeration, trying to find information that's exposed inside of those organizations. But they all, these days, it all ends up to data exfiltration, getting into that environment, maybe ransomware, but it's a lot about trying to get into there and get that information out. In 2018, we saw some around like voter rolls being taken in the US, things like that. But when you think about those kind of hacks, it's almost back to the olden days of the early 2010s, which is a ridiculous thing to say, where people would get hacked and they would lose data and they'd be like, oh, the data's gone, someone took the data. And then they would just be like, okay, well, we'll figure out attribution later. And then no one worries about attribution because everyone's life continues, except for the people that are dealing with it. Now it's a lot more focused on ransomware, potentially blackmailing people, getting that data out, doing more with that data, because there's a lot of value in data. That's really what we've learned over the last 10 years is there's value to that data. The attackers are going to take value for that data.
I think a good point that you mentioned, Matt, is that this is the propaganda-driven campaigns, and I think that what drives people is something that's more emotional. So if they'll get emails that 5 things you haven't heard about your favorite candidate, I want to hear that, okay, or something that is really drives them or hit something emotional, and they will open that. It's not 5 things you haven't heard about your gas station nearby. No, something that is really turning them. Okay, I want to know what someone is saying about him, or maybe I can use that in my discussion with my friends tomorrow at the bar. So I think what drives people, it's mostly emotions, and having that into campaigns, that's going to be really interesting.
So valuable as an attacker to be able to kind of trigger someone and be like, yeah, I'm interested in this. If you can get someone to be interested, you're set. You're done at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah, curiosity is certainly a big driver, and it's human nature to click on something that's interesting. You know, if especially you have a curated subject line that has your name in it and, you know, has something that is relevant to you and something that you're interested in. Unfortunately, it's just a matter of time before that's opened.
Yep, for sure.
All right, so we kind of covered the predictions that we had to share today. I think we have a couple of predictions in the chat here, but just a reminder to place your predictions. Whoever has the most ridiculous prediction will win a $25 gift card from Amazon, courtesy of Votiro. So I'll take a few more minutes to think about those. And in the meantime, we can go to our Q&A period. Know that we have a question that we kind of touched upon earlier from Thomas. He said, what's the best way to fight against phishing in terms of prevention? Do we see any effectiveness with phishing tests designed to help employees identify red flags to look for?
So that's a great question. So as I mentioned about the effectiveness of phishing tests or campaigns with employees, it usually works just for the around the phishing campaign, and everyone knows that they need to win that spot the phishing game. Otherwise, they would do that again. So there is a limited effectiveness for that. Although probably from compliance perspective, we'll still need to do that. There is no way to avoid that. One of the things that you mentioned as well is to have more preventive approaches. So for example, screening documents before they land in the mailbox. I mean, one of the stats from latest stats from Proofpoint's annual report is that those attachments are likely to be clicked more than links, for example. Okay, because there's actual data in it. It looks more genuine than just a link. So, for example, deploying a proactive solution like a content in summary reconstruction, we have that in Votiro. So every document before it lands in the mailbox, it gets reconstructed and sanitized, so the user can open any document without the need to think twice. So this is one alternative of having a preventive approach. Same goes for anything that's being uploaded to a web applications or anything that goes into organizations. So monitoring the parameter and understand what goes into the organization and think about preventive solutions and not just not only visibility and detection, which is great as well. And as Matt mentioned, both need to be augmented together in order to get the best protection.
Yeah, that's good advice, and brings us into what we do here at Blumira. With Blumira, we're very focused on detection and response. We detect all of the steps that a threat actor would have to go through in a ransomware kill chain or malware. And we're able to help organizations detect early so that they're able to prevent an attack from, becoming something that would be detrimental from a financial perspective and from a security perspective to their organization. Matt, can you talk a little bit about, what Blumira is all about and, what a free trial entails for people?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to step back to the phishing thing real quick because I just want to add one last thing to that.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, you're fine. You know me, I'm just going to randomly talk about things. That's just what I do at times. Everything Aviv said is 100% true. The only thing that I'll also add that we've seen really a lot of success on is make it as easy as possible for your users to report phishing and respond quickly to every phishing report that you get. Then at least they will engage you and your IT team with those phishing reports, and they won't just not do it. It ends up being quite successful. Phishing tests, like Aviv said, it is tenuous at best if they are actually helpful for organizations. You're better off just saying, like, if it says seems weird, just tell us and we'll let you know if you can click it. And I know that sounds terrible from an IT load perspective, but it will save your sanity if you don't get owned. But in general, yes, yeah, like the Office plugin. Yeah, exactly. Those will save your sanity, but make sure you're following up, because if you don't, then they will stop clicking it, and then they'll just start clicking phishing emails, and that's the negative involved. So now let me jump over to Blumira. So here at Blumira, we are different as a SIM in that we don't limit based on data. We basically ask people to send us as much data as you can so we can get visibility into your environment. And for free trials or just the utilization of Blumira, we push people to essentially give us as much as we can to get that visibility in your environment, like you were talking about earlier. When you talk about phishing, when you talk about that exploitation, it's all really complex. And what we do as an organization is we believe that you shouldn't need to learn how Cobalt Strike is leveraged. You should be able to just leverage our ability to detect Cobalt Strike. So what we do is we ask you to give us as much visibility in your environment as you can. We ingest it all at scale into the cloud, and then we tell you when we find bad stuff. And we also do it from a focus of ensuring that we reduce risk for you and your environment as well. Because as Erica said, we focus mostly on the detection and response side, whereas Votiro and we were focusing on that prevention, making sure that stuff is safe, which is also just as important as when it comes to that whole kill chain of the environment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, Aviv, can you talk a little bit about what Votiro does and how you can prevent malware in organizations?
Sure. So we in Votiro, we focus on the data that actually flows into the organization. So every document, every piece of content that travels either by email, download from the web, upload to a client-facing portal, every document, every piece of data might contain a risk in it. And the approach that we offering is, instead of trying to find the bad stuff in data, we just reconstructing and sanitizing the data. So it's get into organization free of anything that might be malicious. So you can open any document without the need to think twice. We don't use any detection mechanism. We actually preventing by taking, for example, an Excel spreadsheet and rebuilding it based on the safe template of the Excel spreadsheet, preserving every feature, every content, every anything that is usable. So the users just can open any document from their phone, from their Office 365 email, from their Chrome browser. And by leveraging that, you can reduce the load on the IT teams. So the organization can be risk-free and highly productive, which I think that's something that we're not talking about enough in our industry, how to get the business more productive, how not to block them, how not to tell them, think twice, just let them work, which is what we are focusing on.
That's great. Yeah, it seems like, here at Blumira, we're focused on detection response. Votiro is focused on the prevention aspect of malware and ransomware. So if you have both of those products, you're pretty well protected in terms of malware. Thank you for explaining that, Aviv. So let's go back to the predictions that a few people shared in the chat. We got some good ones here. So one from Lexi was that she predicts all hacking groups will be infused with the spirit of the holidays this December and decide to mutually give up on hacking in 2022 and dedicate their lives to charity. That's a good one. And that would certainly be a nice, dream, but unfortunately it is a kind of ridiculous prediction. So that's definitely a good one that she contributed there. We got one from Thomas K. He's predicting an increase on ransomware on small municipalities, which is not very ridiculous. It is probably a very accurate prediction, and but definitely a good one. And we've also got one from Thomas W. He says, this is a good one. He says, Santa is behind all of the financial cyber attacks to get us to all buy more toys for our kids. Wow, not a lot of faith in Santa, Thomas. Aviv and Matt, do you have any votes for which one is the most ridiculous?
Well, I believe that actually Thomas W nailed that. I think that finding out that Santa is behind all the attacks, I think I would vote for that.
Yeah, I'm good at that. Yeah, Santa definitely is involved in Emotet, so that makes sense.
Oh, we got a last minute prediction. Someone says we will be invaded by aliens, causing hackers and security teams to come together to fight a common enemy.
The Men in Black story, yes.
That's also a good one. Do we still want to go with Thomas as the winner?
So Santa. I like Santa.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to go with a nice holiday themed, being the holidays.
I do like it. Sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much to those of you who participated in the polls, who participated in predicting the malware landscape of 2022. We all had a great time, and we hope you did as well and learned a few things. Matt and Aviv, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for spending your Friday with us and sharing your insight. We really, really appreciate it.
Of course.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Aviv.
Yeah. And we've also, to our attendees, we have a live stream this Monday with Matt. He'll be talking about the Log4j new vulnerability attack vector that he discovered, which is pretty interesting. So stay tuned for that one. That's at Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I believe. We hope to see you there. Hope everyone has a great weekend. And thank you again to our guests and our attendees.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys.